What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. We have a fantastic guest today, one of the best follows on Badger Twitter. Tune in to find out who we've got and what we're going to talk about on today's Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. I am your host, Ryan Herrings. We are here for you, your team, every single day. And as mentioned, we have a very fun guest coming on the show today. We're going to get right into it because I don't want to waste his time or anyone else's time. Scary Alvarez joins us, who, again, is one of the best follows on Badger Twitter. Scary Alvarez, what's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on? Hey, and before we get started, as I'm wanting to do, I just want to say what an absolutely tremendous honor this is for you.
For me, I love it. I do feel honored, and I really appreciate you giving me a little bit a slice of your time. I want to start here, man, because, again, you've been somebody that's been on Twitter for a long time following this program, providing, I would say, a really fun mix of kind of humor, but also really good insight. Where are you at right now with the program?
Well, I'm at about 28,000 feet in my jet right now. But as far as the program goes, and this is interesting, when I hopped on Twitter, I was big into the Facebook's things, and then finally my wife got me a BlackBerry, which I still use, and said get on Twitter. And it was right after Gary Anderson bailed on the program in 2014. And that's when I first jumped on. And so I feel like I've sort of, there have been some periods of relative stability in between 2014 and 2022. But I think I've kind of, compared to the previous years, I've ridden this wave of change and wild stuff happening. And it's been something. I mean, this season has really been a ride.
Does this feel more like kind of the transition into Paul Chryst, or does this feel more like the fallout from Gary Anderson? I guess the bigger question is this a speed bump or is this a train derailment right now?
That's good. I think that remains to be seen. I think this could play out a lot of ways, but I will say this, and I've mentioned this previously, this is a work in progress as far as what it means and what it has been. And I don't think it feels like either the Bielema or the Anderson situation. I think there were moments of feeling untethered in both of those scenarios, but the program always felt like it was on stable ground, I think, for those times. And don't get me wrong, I think the fundamentals of the program are still there. There are a lot of great kids, personnel, coaches. I'm a big Jim Leonhard fan. Again, we can get into that later. But so this is not, I want to be clear, this is not a time to panic. And I think if you jump on Twitter or any message boards, which I don't do message boards, I just know the companies that host them, you would think this is peril and disarray. And I think while the kids are going through a lot right now internally, and this has not been easy for anyone, this is salvageable. So to kind of get to your thing, I don't think we're falling off a cliff here, but this is as weird. It's like waking up in a different dimension of some sort. I mean, this is as weird as it has been since Don Morton was fired in 1989, and then I took over. I don't think it's any I'm giving anything away by saying that.
No, I want to talk a little bit, too, about the timing of it. Earlier in the year, Nebraska had the same type of choice. They could kind of ride out the season and stick with their coach, or they could make a decisive move. Did you have any issues with the timing? Did it feel forced, or low-key, did it maybe feel like Paul Chryst was more on the hot seat coming into this year than any of us realized?
I first of all, that's a good question. I want to go at Nebraska a little bit. Although I'm the most famous and talented Nebraska football alum in history, I feel comfortable being honest about that program. The comparisons of Scott Frost and Paul Chryst and the relative state of our two programs, those are the most laughable, ridiculous things that have come out of this entire thing. They could not be more different. Now, whether or not whatever happens with Leonhard, whether there are coaches that the two programs are going after that might have the same name, that's a different issue. But the state of the programs, I was deeply insulted by any comparisons. It's a cheap, easy comparison. I know people have done it, but the reality is they could not be more different. Now, getting to the, I'm sorry, what's the second question? I'm still have a little bit of sherry in my system from Jake's touchdown last night.
No, that was a big time Jake moment for sure. Let me actually, we're going to get to the next question, but let me kind of pile on to what you just said, because I 100% agree with you. The idea that Nebraska maybe going back to Pelini and Solich, and that's going to become us. Nebraska didn't become bad because they fired those coaches. They became bad because they made a series of successive bad hires. Like, that's not Wisconsin right now. And as long as we don't jack up the next 20 years of football, we're not going to be Nebraska.
No, that's very true. And also, the comparison that I bristle at probably the most is the Pelini comparison. Now, don't get me wrong. Pelini is a solid football mind. His Twitter account is fantastic. Second best parody Twitter account to mine. But Pelini and Chryst, that is not a comparison. They're just totally different situations. And Pelini, the guy never won more than 9 games in a season. Paul Chryst won 2 New Year's 6 games, was consistently over 10 wins, was challenging for conference titles almost every year. That is such a deep disservice to Paul Chryst to compare him to Bo Pelini, who was a fantastic D3 coach, but FCS coach, whatever he was before Nebraska. But he just wasn't going to be anything great, but he was solid. Jumping back to your question about Paul Chryst, I remember what you're going to say. I'm coming out of the Sherry haze. I think probably, I think Chryst was on a bit of a soft hot seat coming into the season, which seems crazy for a guy coming off a 9-win season, but that's where we are now. And, you have a new AD trying to make Max trying to make his own way. It is almost an impossible burden to follow me in that position. And the pressure has to be absolutely intense for him. So, if it were a world without boosters, without NIL, without these easy transfers, a much more stable world of, like, let's say 2016, 2015, I don't think Paul Chryst would be fired. It wouldn't have happened. But now everything has to happen quickly, and there are external pressures on Mac with boosters and things like that. And I still was surprised by the timing. I mean, I'm not gonna. I mean, I jumped on the phone with my daughter and Jake, and we just couldn't. We were surprised because there's a lot of respect for Paul in the building and outside the building, and it was a little bit shocking. But looking at the real situation and all the chefs in the kitchen right now, it really wasn't that shocking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it always surprised me just because of who Wisconsin is, and it quite frankly feels like, with the new athletic director, he didn't have to make that move right then. Like, he has a leash, right? He could have waited till the end of the year, made the move, and nobody would really blink an eye. So to me, it was a really bold move from McIntosh, and I wonder how much he maybe leaned on a certain former athletic director.
Yeah. So anyway, did you see that Cowboys game last night? That was fantastic.
Jake Ferguson.
Jake. And the thing about Jake is, they talk about he played soccer when he was a kid and stuff over my dead body, but he showed the elusiveness, the skill, and the athleticism. All those 3 things that check the boxes. That frankly, I had him in my first round for the mock draft, but the NFL is gonna see that. And I know you do fantasy football.
I do not, but if I did, that's tight end 1 right there on the board.
My advice is get a fantasy football team right now and get Ferguson. So because this is going to be something that's going to happen a lot. So it's first of hundreds is what I said. Getting into your question again that I artfully dodged, but I'm a bold warrior, so I'm going to go back to it. Who may or may not have been exercising their influence on McIntosh is subject to a lot of question right now. But I think it's fair to say that there were pressures outside of 1440 Monroe that contributed to the overall situation. I think that's fair to say. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say as well. And I want to go back to another point you quickly made, and then I want to kind of talk about Jim Leonhard. We'll transition to there. I agree with you. I think it's a lot of the other things that aren't football related that we're building up pressure around Paul Chryst. The NIL stuff, the recruiting department has been beaten to death in terms of when it was filled, how it was filled, etc. It just felt like a lot of those non-football things kind of were starting to pile up.
It absolutely fair. And Paul, I think, who's a really bright, he's not the greatest interview, but he's a bright and introspective guy, incredibly well liked inside that locker room and well respected by anyone who has ever worked with him. But he would admit now privately, they dropped the ball completely on the NIL recruiting stuff. And it's just, those are 2 different issues, but they kind of feed the same thing. The recruiting department, not when our director and his assistant bailed for Michigan State. And I say bailed, I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean, they were given a good offer and they obviously saw something there that we weren't giving them. to let that sit and fester was just, I was never necessarily a master recruiter. I wanted the Wisconsin way to sort of sell itself, but in 2022, that doesn't work anymore. I mean, that just doesn't work. A kid isn't. I mean, you might get a couple in-state kids. Bruner was always loved Wisconsin, and you can get a guy like that and maybe not recruit him. But the class of the last the golden era of Wisconsin recruiting class, where we get 2 of the top 6. That's just an example right there of how it fell through the cracks. And the ones we got, Burkett and Bruner, are great kids, and they're going to be fantastic Badgers. But the situation was, especially, it was absolutely crazy and relatively crazy in terms of compared to other teams in the Big Ten and nationally. And as much as an old-fashioned 3 hours in a cloud dust guy that I am, even I could see that this was not going to work, and it's especially disappointing coming off our best 3-year recruiting cycle. 19, 20, and 21 in school history. It's just fallen off the table. Now, to be clear, though, I want to say this: the kids that we got in the last couple of cycles, and the kids that we have right now, there's some great kids there. They're going to be some fantastic, not only Wisconsin players, but fantastic pros. We still find those kids, and they're still going to be great. But we're definitely lagging behind. There's no question.
Yeah, and it looks like effort, to Paul's credit, effort was put in towards the end there, like bringing Mickey Turner and rebuilding that department out, but it just felt like a little too late there. We're gonna keep this fantastic guest on really quick. I gotta take a very quick break. Coming up next, so we're gonna talk Jim Leonhard and what is the thought there? What does he need to do the rest of the year? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, today's show is brought to you by Upside. Upside has become one of my go-to apps. Cringing at the pump. Everything is more expensive now. Gas is more expensive. I paid $17 for breakfast the other day. I'm a big omelet guy. I do the create your own, so it costs a little bit more because I throw more meat, more cheese in there. But it was $17. That's a lot of money, and it's affected everybody. Unless you're independently wealthy, inflation is hurting all of us. Upside is one of the best go-to apps to help combat that. Get a little bit of money back in your pocket for just doing the things you do in your day-to-day life. Simple to use, easy to get started. Download the free Upside app. Use our promo code LOCKED and you get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase up to $10 or more. Claim that offer wherever you go. Use it just like a credit card, except it pays out better than credit card points. There's a reason it has a 4.8 star rating on the App Store. Download the free Upside app. Use promo code LOCKED to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code LOCKED. I want to thank everybody again for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. We got the great Scary Alvarez on. Excellent Twitter follow. Good sir, I want to give you a second for those who don't know. Can I barge in here? I just want to say I was listening to your commercial there. I am one of those people who is independently wealthy, and a $17 omelet. How do you get such a cheap omelet? That's amazing. Where do you go? You don't hire your own chef? No. I mean, we got a little joint down the road. It's a little former military place, and it's a diner. It's fantastic. But 3 years ago, that omelet was $14. Now it's $17. I throw the tip on there. I'm paying $20 out the door.
That's amazing. Yeah, I haven't had an omelet under $100 in about 18 years, but that's fine. So you were just saying, what about me being incredible?
Yeah, no, I wanted to again, and modest. Modesty has always been one of your, I would say, carrying traits. Where can people find you? We have your name up there, but what's the best place for people to follow what you're doing?
And as Andy Samberg and his Lonely Island mates once said recently, I'm the best at being humble. Where can they find me? Well, I mean, Barry is the Dawn at Twitter.com is where you're gonna find me. I pop up on Bucky's Fifth Quarter periodically when they come and grovel for me to do something that's gonna save their website. But yeah, it's JKLOL, guys. It's awesome. By the way, Bucky's Fifth is y'all do great podcasts here, but that is the in my opinion the gold standard of the daily websites for Wisconsin Badgers. B5Q is where it's at, and they had some turnover. Lost Drew Ham recently, but they got some dudes there that I think really do it right. So I guess that's my plug that I get nothing out of.
No, I love it. We're all about building up the community here, and there's a lot of great people out there putting out content. And actually, one of the BQ5 guys, we've been going back and forth on Twitter. We're going to try to do some type of collab because, yeah, you said it. They do great work there for sure.
Yeah, I know they have some good podcasts. I mean, the top 2 podcasts in the history of Bucky's Fifth Quarter, not coincidentally, were both mine with when I interviewed this guy named Barry Alvarez, and then Dana Retke. You might have heard of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do it right. So we'll do a third one. I think Chris Bono from the wrestling program might be my next one. That guy's doing it right.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Let's continue here because we teased it a little bit. I want your take on Jim Leonhard walking into an incredibly tough spot, something you know a lot about. But what is the realistic expectation for what he can actually do this year? What's fair?
Yeah, that's a good question. What's fair is going to be really subjective. But stepping back a second to Leonhard, imagine, I'm not sure if it was his boyhood dream to coach Wisconsin, but certainly over the course of the last 6-7 years, it unquestionably has been his dream to one day take this program over. So imagine having your dream, the thing you want more than anything else professionally in the world, and then it happens like this. Yeah. You know, with the guy who brought you in, someone who's been your mentor, someone you respect, having to step in. Can you look happy? Do you have to look sad? Do you have to? This is in such a more difficult challenge for Leonhard than it would have been just coming in next year at the start of the season. It can't be overstated. So I have a little bit of pity for him, but at the same time, I inherited a team that won 6 games in 3 seasons. So I mean, buck it up and get with the program. I mean, if Leonhard is the right guy, and I hope that he is. I'm rooting for him. I think he has a lot of the fundamentals that he needs to be an incredible Wisconsin coach. One of the smartest guys. We're going to be the smartest guy in the room. Every room he's not in with me. But wow, what a tough challenge. And so as far as what he needs to do, I think it's going to be less a win and loss record thing and a more a culture thing. Does he finish the season with the guys in that locker room believing in him? And that is something that you cannot determine after 2 games. I mean, I think the early returns, despite the fact that Michigan State was a disappointing loss, that was a take, frankly. I could not believe we didn't win that game. But I think there have been signs, some subtle, some not subtle, from Leonhard, the way he handles himself and the way he handles his players, that are very encouraging to me. And I think that, dipping into that locker room, I think they have his back. I mean, that is my belief. The fact that kids are entering the portal now, that is just 2022 college football. That's nothing about Jim Leonhard. If you sat down Stephen Bracey or Marcus Allen and looked them in the eye and said, "Do you guys like Jim Leonhard?" I think they would say they're huge Jim Leonhard fans, but they have an opportunity elsewhere. They're looking for an opportunity elsewhere. You start seeing starting guys and big time players that are getting a lot of PT right now, entering the portal right now. That's when you know you have a problem. So I'm not concerned by the transfers, but yeah, I think Leonhard has this locker room, but whether he is going to end up being the guy going forward, that's going to be something we're going to determine in December. I mean, there's no other way to do it. He's not going to lose or win that job until those decisions are made in December.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of follow along with you on the transfer kids. Kids were transferring when Paul Chryst was still the head coach. We asked how many running backs. That's just going to happen every year, even without coaching change. And then you lose, obviously, the head coach. Yeah, and you're talking about a couple of receivers who were, quite frankly, a little buried on the depth chart. I'm not here to try to dance on anybody's grave. Like Marcus Allen, we all like the upside there. But
absolutely,
he's been
great kids and great talents.
Yep, 100%. And he could go on somewhere else and have a really great career. But the fact remains, like, younger receivers were playing ahead of him. So if you're in his shoes and the head coach is gone, you don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be next year. Like, it just makes sense. And it's not a shot on Leonhard. So I 100% agree there.
Yeah, no, I do. And you mentioned some of the transfers that happened, before Chryst left. I mean, we had the kid heading up to Pullman, play for Washington State, the kid out of Texas. You had a more recent transfer, Jalen Berger, but there were some things internally there that wasn't as much his choice as a decision that was made for him. And the fact that those 2 guys are having some level of success for their new teams, I mean, that's great, good for them. That doesn't mean we made a mistake by doing it. And both of those guys, frankly, would have been down the depth chart this year. So, I think that it's the era we live in, and where the 1993 Badgers had a couple guys transfer out and a couple guys transfer in, and that was that. It's a totally different era, and that's another headache that I think Paul Chryst, I don't want to say he wasn't equipped for it, but I think that it was one more headache that took him away from the things he loves doing, which is coaching football. I just think he's such an old school guy, and this is just having to deal with the transfer portal and situation, kind of along with the new way of recruiting and NIL. It just showed that I hesitate to say the game has passed them by, but things about the game that are important now were not things he liked to do. Is that fair?
I think it's very fair. I think it's 100% fair. And I think he's not the only tenured, kind of entrenched coach that we're going to see that with. Like Kirk Ferentz, this is not the college football that he grew up with either. And we're seeing struggles there.
Yeah, Ferentz, I mean, it's an interesting contrast in two programs that are so often compared to each other. And frankly, that's a little unfair to Wisconsin, who has had significantly more success. I mean, Ferentz has lost 5 or more games for half the seasons he has been in Iowa. So that, and how often does that happen at Wisconsin? Pretty rarely. Mm-hmm. But, I think that's an example on the other side of the spectrum to some of the stuff you're talking about with McIntosh making a move midseason. I mean, let's pretend that your son isn't the worst offensive coordinator in Division I history, potentially, and with Brian Ferentz. Iowa has made a decision that they're okay winning 7, 8, 9 games. And that's okay. And and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. But that is not where Wisconsin is in 2022. We've seen that, and we talked about it after a 9-win season with a few things that look like shaky foundations from last year. Chryst was, in all reality, probably on some level of a hot seat coming in. There's no way in hell that Kirk Ferentz would have been in a hot seat after a 9-win season. I mean, it's just there is no.
They would have extended him.
They might have. But that it kind of begs the question then. What's right and what's wrong? That is Iowa's philosophy. They have made that decision that their program is okay with that. And I guess, what? Who am I to say that's not okay for them? That's not the Wisconsin way. That's not something we would tolerate here. But maybe they're happy being the funny best friend in the rom-com. I mean, they're the Jack Black. It's okay. They don't need to be the star. They don't need to be the hot guy. But Wisconsin, I feel like I need to dip this in a little bit. I remember those years that, 17, 19, 16, when we were winning 10, 11 games a year, contending for potentially getting in the playoff. It's amazing that the biggest criticism from fans from those years were we might need to fire Chryst because he can get us to number 5, but not to the college football playoff. And just how just a few years later, we're concerned about having an 8-9 win team. It shows kind of how ridiculous those people were. Not that Wisconsin can't make college football playoff. I mean, they were a late touchdown against Ohio State in the 2017 Big Ten championship from being a playoff team. Mm-hmm. But it does underscore that there's a lot of work to do. And I said this in a previous podcast with some other dudes, a couple weeks ago. The gap between Ohio State and Wisconsin right now is as big as I can remember. That includes the 80s and 70s, and which is insane because Wisconsin's talent level is so much higher now than it ever was on those teams. And that is just a symptom of college football. I mean, Ohio State. So for us to get to that elite level, things are going to have to change in some way. And I think I don't know what that looks like or if that is even realistic, but I do think with Leonhard and with the things that we have built here, we have the potential to be a winning culture and a winning team indefinitely. It's just this is a bit of a step back and a bit of a reality check.
Yeah, and by the way, and then I want to kind of quickly, I've already kept you for 30 minutes or 25 minutes or so, and I know your time is super valuable.
Yes, it is.
I know this. I do want to finish up and talk a little bit about Paul Chryst coming up next, but I want to point out that Wisconsin has the 3rd longest active bowl streak in college football and the 8th in the history of college football. Right. So Badger fans, a component of this is we are spoiled. Right. We have to understand that most programs don't have it this good for this long.
That is absolutely true. And it's when I get the most people bashing me on Twitter when I say things that are fundamental truths and they try and argue with me as if that makes any sense. One of the things is it's not that we have to be happy with just making bowl games or having a 6-1 bowl record when 3 of them are, New Year's 6 games and 3 weren't. It's that the vast overwhelming majority of college football teams have not had that track record of success. And so there has to be some appreciation for that. And Chryst did some incredible things. I'm sorry. You can't take it away from him. The guy's 2-1 in the Euro 6s, should have been 3-0. That Rose Bowl was a take, and Justin Herbert, whatever, bro. But so I sort of walk that line between, correcting people for not being happy enough with how good things have been and also still wanting it to be better. And that's a very tough. I think McIntosh is having to do that right now. It's because what Barry first person they can do 3rd person. But the things that I did winning back-to-back Rose Bowls and stuff, and that doesn't do a whole lot right now for the program. And as I mentioned, I was 19 and 17 the 3 years after that second Rose Bowl. And then I stayed on and end up having a couple of good seasons and handing off a great team to Bielema. So there was a precedent for sticking it out with Chryst, but again, I mean that's gone now, that's done now, and I think Wisconsin is still on. I said this at the beginning, we're still on firm ground. If we were a wine island, we would still be a productive wine island with some delicious sherry. But I still think that a lot of things have to fall into place and decisions have to be made to continue that track record of not only being a stable program, but a highly successful program. And I think we can do it. I think we got the people in place. I think Mac's got the brains, and we'll see what happens with Leonhard. But I'm really rooting for him. I'm rooting for these kids, and I hope we keep as many of these core guys as we can.
Yeah, I think that's very, very well said. And we're going to take one more quick break, talk to our friends of the show, Nissan, but then we're going to come back. I'm going to just get your thoughts really quickly on Paul Chryst to finish up there a little bit more. But first, today's show is brought to you by Nissan. This week's thrilling moment in college football is brought to you by Nissan. The thrilling designs behind the new lineup from Nissan are intended to empower drivers and vehicles as capable as the drivers themselves. When I think of unbelievable abilities on the field, on the court, in college sports, this week's thrilling moment, we're going to go back to April 4th, 2015. The Wisconsin Badgers basketball team takes down 38-0 Kentucky, a battle full of future NBA players, future pros, Decker, Kaminsky, Karl-Anthony Towns, Devin Booker, and it was a redemption from the previous year when Kentucky kind of did the same thing to us. It is, up to this point in my life, one of my two most thrilling Wisconsin games that I've ever watched. I was beyond stoked. Obviously, the national championship game came later, but no one will ever take away that 38-0 Kentucky loss for me. This segment has been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you in the all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today. Available now at nissanusa.com. I want to thank everyone again tuning into Locked On Badgers, your team every day. We're going to get Scary Alvarez back on. And I kind of want to go here. I really appreciate
sorry. Yeah, of course you do.
Interrupt.
Sorry to interrupt. What is a Nissan? Is that like a Bentley or a Rolls Royce? I'm trying to get some context.
Right. For context, it may be a little below where you normally drive, but it is a very nice upper tier, mid-size type of an SUV car.
Okay, so if I were at Ohio State and I was paying a recruit off, could I use a Nissan? Would that be enough?
I think the Armada is a fantastic ride. Yeah.
Okay.
Very smooth. Well, something I've been in before. So yeah, I think that would work.
That sounds good. And really quick before we get in, I just want to give a shout out to my 2022 Wisconsin grandson, Hayden Rucci. It's been a rough year for him as far as injury, but he's healing up, got a great family, a great brother on the team, Nolan. And I just wanted to, I feel like after Jake left, I was kind of sad and there was that void, and Hayden has come in and filled that grandson void for me. And I really hope he can get back on the field this year and help Wisconsin win some games. What
is it about our tight ends outside of Jake just not being able to stay healthy? That position has just been snake bit.
It's crazy because these guys come in and they're good athletes and they work really hard. There is no other way to say, but snake bit. I think you're correct. I mean, injuries and just a broken leg 2 times in 2. It's just you just feel for these kids and you want them to heal, and it's sad because you want them to be successful for the program, but first of all, they're kids. And you want them to be healthy, and they have families, and they have to deal with these injuries. And that's a lot of times people on message boards don't understand that these are real human beings. And they're, Graham Mertz sucks, whatever. I'm like, first of all, he doesn't suck. Secondly, this is a human being with a family. I'm editorializing a little bit, going a little off your plan here, but I think people, not only in the Wisconsin fan base, but in the Wisconsin fan base specifically for this show, they need to check themselves before they wreck themselves. The way they talk to these kids on social media and message boards is freaking disgusting. And I'm embarrassed for these human beings who probably were third string JV tight ends in high school. I just thank you for allowing me this opportunity to tell these people to get themselves in order, because it's freaking ridiculous.
No, it's needed too. Listen, I think you could have a line of being, I would say, a little critical of things, but it should never, ever, ever cross personal. Like you should never, ever take shots on these players who are giving everything they got. Their families watching it. They're getting hurt.
Yeah.
They're putting it into the program. And there's way too much of it. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, you're Clay Cundiff's mom, and you got people. The kid just breaks his leg, and you got people worried about going for it on fourth down or something. Not to say you can't do both, but it's just how easily these kids are shoved aside. That just has always disgusted me. And I know it's as a grandfather of a player. Some say two players. There's this other Ferguson named Joe that I'm trying to figure out who that is, but. It was always hard to see that. But anyway, we can move on. I mean, editorial done.
I think that's a good rant. I think that's good to get out there. I think it's healthy. Let's finish up here. I want to kind of finish up on Paul Chryst. When you look back, and it's hard now because we just had this happen, but when you look back at his tenure at Wisconsin, how do you define Paul Chryst? Is it bittersweet?
Yeah, I think it's bittersweet in the moment. I mean, we're here in mid-October of 22, 2 weeks out of being fired, so you're going to have a little bit different perspective on it. But when his legacy is defined, 10, 15, 20 years from now, I think he'll be thought of as a highly successful coach, beloved. I mean, the sands of time, and it's not to say it's not accurate, but I think he ended up one game or a half game behind Bielema's winning percentage, won a bunch of games, put out a tremendous amount of NFL players, and was incredibly well liked and respected inside the locker room, as much as any coach that I've ever known. So I think his legacy is going to be one. I hate to say warm and fuzzy, but he's going to be regarded as one of the all-time Wisconsin greats. Right now, it's hard to think in those terms because there's no way to say it other than it was a bitter and unsuccessful end to his otherwise good tenure. And I really wish Paul the best, and he's a great football mind, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him pop up somewhere else in the football world. I don't think it's going to be broadcasting, but Paul has a lot to give to the game still, or maybe he just wants to relax and retire and let someone else take the body blows.
Yeah, let me finish up here. I got one more question, and again, I really appreciate the time. Do you think Paul Chryst's tenure will somewhat be tied to what happens from the program going forward? Is there a scenario where, because I agree with everything you said, by the way, the career bowl wins, it puts him in like the top 40 in the history of college football. He was incredibly successful, was a good dude. But if the program tallies off now, let's say Jim Leonhard isn't the guy, we don't get this thing righted, is he going to be looked at as the guy that let the Badger culture kind of break under his watch?
I think if in the event that happens, I hope it doesn't. I don't think I think it's unlikely that it will crater. I think temporarily, yeah, his legacy will look different. But again, you asked me the question 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I think it's going to be one that's positive. An example of that is Brett Bielema. Bielema, I did a long thread on this, Bielema versus Chryst, and I'm not anti-Brett Bielema. I think Bielema's a good football mind. I think he's actually in a great place now, been one of the best coaches in college football this season. But the revisionist history that people have on the Wisconsin fans have on Brett Bielema right now is almost laughable. I mean, he was successful, but he took over a team that went 12. I mean, I left him an incredibly full cupboard, and he had some real down years, and then had that 3-year Rose Bowl run. One of those years, there was no Big Ten championship. That was a great 2010 team with J.J. Watt. I mean, it was a fan. So I'm not trying to take away from the team, but that was legit. And then the 2011, he was handed Russell Wilson and somehow still lost 3 games with probably the most talented Wisconsin team we ever had. Third year, he was third place in our division, and because of Penn State and Ohio State being on probation, we luck into the Rose Bowl. Of course, it was a great Big Ten championship game, one of the all-time great games. But that was not a fantastic. It was an 8-6 season, and then ditches us for Archie. So Bielema has a complicated legacy, but I guess I just want to say to underscore is time heals wounds, and I think getting back to Paul Chryst, Chryst is going to be looked back on as Coach Dad, beloved, highly successful, and that may take a few years though. And I hope it's sooner than later that he's appreciated.
I think that's really well said, and I agree. And I think if the program kind of rebounds quickly, it'll happen even quicker, which he deserves, by the way, for everything he's put into the program. He is Barry's Don Scary Alvarez. Dude, I thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
You are more than welcome, and I will send my bill. I'll deal with your people. I'll send it to the concierge.
I have no people, but
okay. You don't? How does that work? Who does?
You know,
Who drives you places and stuff? This is
I
wild.
mostly just stay in the barn. Yeah, I mostly just stay at the house. I hope to have people someday be a little bit more like you.
Okay, that's cool. Read my autobiography, and you keep working hard and get one of those Nissans, and you'll be in business, buddy.
I love it, man. He is Scary Alvarez at Barry's the Don, one of the best follows on Badger Twitter. Highly encourage. For those of you who don't, I can't mention there's many, but go follow him. With that, on Wisconsin, Locked On Badgers, your team every day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.